All right, in this video we're going to cover the wet on wet technique and the salt technique, and we're also going to cover the sponge technique. So we need to start by setting up our whole area just like before with the water on the dominant side and your brushes on the dominant side, the paper towel on your non-dominant side in your non-dominant hand. I'm going to start by activating two colors, the two colors that I want to use today. We need to use contrasting colors. And I am choosing to use orange and purple. So I'm going to do that. If you use other colors, that's fine. And it just is fine. So I've dripped water into them, and now they're getting ready to go. And what I'm going to do is first do the orange, and I'm going to take just a little bit of the orange because down here I need to paint it a light color first to start with. So what I'm going to do is just use a little bit of orange and a lot of water, and I'm just going to let it be this kind of light peachy orange, okay? So what I will do first with this is really similar to what we did with the alcohol and crayon, and it's just making sure that we're going to just cover this with a tone and let it get dry. So I'm going to begin with my water and just lightly get it painted with water, and then now I'm dipping my paint into the brush so that it soaks in there and gets a lot of paint on the brush, and I'm just going to paint it across the sponge technique. Now this needs to dry before I can do anything to it. If I were to sponge on it right now, it would just fuzz out and it wouldn't do anything. So I've done that, and what I'm going to do is just turn it over and paint down here, okay? And I'm going to do that because I don't want to drag my hand across this that's drying, and I want to let it have a chance to dry. So our next step is to get the colors ready to do the wet on wet technique. And for the wet on wet technique, I need to start by making my orange a lot brighter. It's not gonna look very cool for the salt technique or the wet on wet technique if my orange is all wimpy like I needed it for the base layer of the sponge technique. So after my orange is brought down and it's a little bit brighter and it's nice and soupy, I'm going to rinse out my brush, and I'm gonna go get the purple. I'm gonna bring the purple down. I don't need as much purple because purple is a very strong color. So I'm just going to do that. Now, I have a lot of purple in my brush. Let me zoom in so that you can see me do this. I have a lot of purple in my brush, and I want to make sure that the color comes out and it stays in my palette. So what I'm going to do is use my finger. I'm going to push the paintbrush on the corner of the palette like this, and then I'm going to squeegee it. And look, if you look real close there, you can see it kind of bleed out into the palette area, and that's how you can keep the paint in here, and it will make it so that your colors are brighter and you don't have to work as hard to get them in there. Rather than making your water be full of extra paint, your paint will be full of extra paint. So now I'm going to rinse off my brush, but I'm not going to work real hard to make it clean because I'm going to be using both of those colors on the wet on wet technique. So now we're ready to start the wet on wet technique. I'm going to do some creative finagling here because I don't want my sponge thing to get all ruined. All right, and I want you to be able to see. So my brush is nice and wet, and I'm going to use just water, and it's dirty water, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be extra clean, and I'm just going to paint across it so that it's like that, and it's all nice and soupy. It's shiny. There's lots of water. I used purple last, so I'm just going to dip my brush into the purple and start to add the color. That it's doing right there, that spreading, that sploosh, the beautiful fuzz out, that's exactly what we're looking for. So I'm just going to stick over here on that side with the fuzzing, and I'm going to rinse my brush, wipe it off, and go get the orange so that it's nice and bright. It's nice and bright and puddly. You'll notice that the paint won't go anywhere that you didn't put the water, so you can keep it in the center here by not adding water in other places. That's how the wet on wet technique works. After you've splooshed the two colors down in there together, you can rinse off your brush and set it aside because we won't be using it again. And then we will come over, and I'm just taking a little pinch of salt right? So this is just salt. I just grabbed a little pinch of salt, and I'm going to sprinkle it down, making sure that it goes in the puddliest areas. Okay, and that's it. Just like that for the wet on wet and the salt technique. Now it's not quite dry enough for the sponge technique, so I'm going to go ahead and just pause for a minute and give it a chance to dry. All right, now that that's nice and dry, I can go ahead and try the sponge technique. So over here in my little, my palette, I've got my sponge, and I'm going to just kind of dip that sponge in the puddliest, brightest part of my orange, and then now I can sponge it right on top like that. And then you can see how you can create a little texture with a similar color. And then I'm just going to take my sponge and I'm going to choose another part of it and then dip it in the puddliest part of the other color that I have activated, and then sponge it right on top, and even try a little bit over to the side over here, okay? So that you can see what that texture and technique will look like for your art. After you're done with the sponge, you'll want to rinse him off in your dirty water, squeegee him out real good, make sure he's not all full of paint and water, and then just stick him in the sponge cup again. All right, that's it. Go ahead and finish up.